Hello, friends. Father Frank Pavone here of Priests for Life. Welcome to End Abortion TV. We're with Dr. Theresa Burke of Rachel's Vineyard. So, Theresa, we've been talking about the fact that someone who says, I'm sorry that I had an abortion, might be the mom, might be the dad, might be somebody else in the family. It's not just a matter of seeking forgiveness. There's a lot of hard work to be done, a journey of grieving and of healing relationships, healing. And this has always been fascinating to me, healing your understanding of yourself. Something I've often pondered about the person that's had an abortion, I'd love to get your comments, is you cross a boundary when you kill somebody. When you take part in a death, you cross a boundary that you now realize that you're capable of doing something that maybe you really never thought you were capable of doing. And it seems to me that then it causes a terrible lack of trust of yourself, of your own judgment, of your ability to make decisions in the future. This can be really paralyzing, can't it?
It sure can. And I think the loss of trust with others, but really the self, is devastating for a lot of people. They don't trust their judgment, and they can vacillate over all sorts of things in indecision.
Indecision,
because they don't want to make another mistake.
Another mistake.
Yeah,
right.
and perfectionism follows that. Sometimes people can get like a little OCD, obsessive about everything, and checking and double checking, because that's the trauma.
Because they've made such a gigantic mistake that now it's just coloring every decision they try to make.
And then the flip side of that would be defending the mistake till the cows come home. Like, I can't let down that armor because everything under it would collapse.
So this is why some of them become crusaders.
Yeah,
right to choose. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Or advocates of nonviolence. We can't kill a whale or a seal, or, I'm going to become a vegetarian because that's violence and I'm not violent. And there's sort of like a...
that you reminded me just now of something. In 2019, a number of states, starting with New York in January, passed these very extreme laws, taking away protection from babies, even in the latest stages of pregnancy. And people were just astonished at this. In the same year, some months later, that same state of New York passed a law prohibiting the declawing of cats. Is there something going on here psychologically? I mean, as a body, it seems to me that, well, it's also like you were saying, we will overcompensate in these strange ways. We can't acknowledge that, hey, you shouldn't have taken away protection from those babies. We can't acknowledge that, and so, let's give more protection to the animals.
Well, I never heard that, but yeah, sure. Is that the craziest thing you ever heard? Like, what's the point? That we don't scratch each other? But I do think that, if you don't, this is where the symptoms tell the story, and you're trying to find some way to undo or to look like you're compassionate toward living creatures. You don't want them to have pain.
Yes.
We have to, and that becomes the theme that you go into your advocacy for, because if you're a proponent of that, you couldn't possibly stand for anything that's violent, and that it's a type of undoing and I don't know, conscience scrubbing,
Yes.
And yes. But that's acceptable, and you can talk about that, and you can be proud about the advocacy for nonviolence. So it does feel like.
It feels like we're compensating for something. Yeah, it's just such a tremendous societal blind spot. We, of course, have only begun to scratch the surface here of all the damage that's done by an abortion. And one of the things I want to look at is, because there's so much damage relationally between a man and a woman, even if the abortion that one or another of them experienced was not with that particular man or woman. So two people are going to get married, and they go through a marriage preparation. if one of them has had an abortion in his or her past with someone else, or perhaps they had it with one another, should not this be something that comes up in some way, shape, or form during the marriage preparation?
I absolutely think that's critical, because if there's some other problem that you're marrying, somebody in addiction, an alcohol problem, a drug abuse, even a mental illness of some sort, it's really important that the spouse understands and can be present to that suffering. If you go into a marriage trying to keep that secret and life events come up, or your newborn baby's a trigger, or you have postpartum depression, or whatever is going to happen in the future that you don't know, the fact that your spouse is aware that they love you, that they choose to marry you anyway, because the worst thing that anyone feels is if my husband knew this, he never would have married me, or if he knew this, like to have this feeling of being a Confederate, and that the love isn't, if he really knew me, he wouldn't have done X, Y, Z. That's a terrible feeling for to go on in a marriage.
Right.
Because then the acting out is that I deserve punishment, I shouldn't be trusted, and then people start acting out in those ways.
How would you recommend whether it's the priest or a lay person who's guiding a couple through marriage preparation, broach this topic? Obviously very sensitively, but how would you?
I think we understand so much, and we have so much good research now about the detrimental impact. So to be able to say that if there's been a pregnancy loss in your history, before you go to marriage, this could be a really important and special time for you guys to go through the grieving together. If he wasn't involved or she wasn't involved, go through a healing program together.
Yes.
Because you're going to see from all the people in the group, this is what I would say, that the normal reactions to an abnormal event, that's what post-traumatic reactions are. They're normal reactions to a very abnormal event. And I think it's always validating for the one who suffers to know that they're not crazy when they have these feelings, because this is just part of the symptoms, right? And for their spouse to understand what a trigger is, how they might be triggered, and when they are, what they need, which is loving arms to go around them saying, we're going to get through this. I'm here with you. I love you.
Yes.
And that's a very different experience when there's a trigger than being alone, trying to hide it, trying to compensate around it, trying to run away from it, because then you're going to have moms running away from homes and dads doing their thing. So I just think that it's important. And this is a good time. Like any life transition is a time, even in an annulment. How many annulments are rooted in an abortion before they got married, or early days of the marriage? I write I do the testimonies sometimes for couples because they want the history of the couple and what some of the reasons were that they might not have really understood what they were entering into, or what they were suffering from.
So in other words, put another way, the abortion trauma kept them from entering a valid marriage right from the start, because it was inhibiting.
It can, especially if you're saying, because of this trauma, I don't ever want kids.
There you go.
Yeah,
Right.
If that wasn't discussed, or if there wouldn't be issue, and we hear about this all the time, until it's happening, and if there was a past abortion, they're at 50% risk for repeating and repeating, just because of the trauma repetition.
Yeah.
And a man who, or even a woman whose partner doesn't, every time there's a baby, it's a big crisis instead of a welcome joy. And it's because of the past trauma, not because everything isn't in place.
Right.
With a house and everything they thought they
all
needed.
That might be.
But the unresolved thing compels people to reenact the trauma. Exactly. And they don't even know why sometimes. And it's baffling to a partner.
That's right. Well, that's why we really encourage pastoral ministers to deal with this in marriage preparation.
Absolutely.
Theresa, let me raise another topic. Someone who has had an abortion then goes on in life, has other children, raises these children. The fact of the matter is that abortion has damaged her. It damages the family. I mean, like it or not, the damage is there. Give me your perspective and your advice about telling one's child about one's past abortion.
Oh, you asked the best questions, Father Frank. Because there's a simple answer and there's not a simple answer. And I might differ from other people in my opinion, but I'll give you my opinion. I just think that every parent knows their child.
Yes.
And I think the context of sharing the fact that someone had a past abortion needs to happen in a certain context. And this is what I recommend. I recommend that when you're going to tell a child that you have your aunts and uncles of the child, maybe a youth minister, people who know that you're going to do this, people who've already told you that if your child wants to come talk to them, that these are the go-to people who know I'm telling you this.
Mm-hmm.
Because a child will always want to protect the parents.
Yes.
And no matter the age, when mommy or daddy's hurting, a child can feel like it's their fault. They can feel like, I have to fix this.
Right.
And they're going to care first about their stability of their home. So I never think anyone should tell a child unless they've gone through healing and they can say it without looking like they're falling apart.
Yes.
And I know that people have sought their child's forgiveness, or they might lay the story on them, but they do it in a lot of tears, and that's a threat to the child that mommy's not okay, and it frightens
Right,
them.
that's frightening, yeah.
And if they feel the need to protect the parent, they're going to take all their feelings and not have anywhere to go with them. And so if they had questions, or they were angry, or they always wished they had a bigger brother or sister, and now that, and developmentally, like, younger children seem to just, that's sad, and they name them. And teenagers, sometimes people thought their testimony would stop their daughter from going out and being promiscuous to know this happened. And you can't always guarantee how a child's going to process and then act on the behavior. Well, if she did it, it must be okay for me. And it can have the opposite effect of what you think. So I do think that the truth is always helpful. I do think that family secrets are destructive, but the way in which it's told, and certainly if you're going to give public testimony, your children need to know. And I know that Silent No More is very careful about nobody being out to give a talk in a school or anywhere. And that's the other reason that healing releases you from the shame, and it doesn't feel like such a horrible secret the way it does before you've had support, understanding, healing. So the more healing that there is, the more I think that we can expect people being out there, telling their stories. And there's children also, they come to our retreats, Rachel's Vineyard, because they're grieving a sibling. And we need to give them permission to do that. I know there's other programs that are just dealing with siblings as well. And I think it's important that it's not just one or two people that are going to miss that child. It's part of a whole circle of family. And even for cousins who would have had a cousin. It's a big deal. But I also think, like I said, when you understand why mommy was so sad for all those years, and if you're to learn that later, it's like, oh, because like I said, kids will blame themselves. They think it's their fault. They're doing something wrong. Yes. And there is a whole survivor syndrome. Dr. Philip Ney, who I know you've had on your show many times, he believes that no matter what, that children know, they have a sense that sometimes they'll draw them in a picture when no one said anything. And we also don't know, do they ever hear the mom telling someone over the phone?
Right, they overhear it, right.
How many times do you have conversations you don't know your kids like sitting in the hall listening?
Or we know cases where they've found written information about it. And
But I think it's important. And then spiritually, because we know that there's going to be a reunion someday.
Yeah.
And one of the most touching stories. I hope this isn't off topic, but
this is good.
It's a touching story. There was a leader of Rachel's Vineyard who had cancer, and she was on her deathbed, and she's really at that end of life point where they're like, just go. And then she started describing that she sees her child coming to her, because I think the husband who had helped her with Rachel's Vineyard, I think he said, it's time to go be a mother to Joey now. And so she smiled, and she said that she saw Joey coming to her. And then he said, well, where's the other two? Because they had 3 losses. And she's like, I don't know. it's just Joey. And then she said, oh, here comes my mom. And the mom had both children on each arm.
Really?
Like, so beautiful.
Yeah.
And then to just think in this moment of loss and death, that this image that she had and shared with everyone in the family in the room, that was there in the room at a moment of death, to see that she's going into the next and the children are all there with her mother.
Yeah.
It's like such a beautiful thing. And we hear stories like that all the time.
Yes.
So there's a whole other reality. And I feel like even in Rachel's Vineyard, the veil is lifted on the truth of what this is, but the veil somewhere between heaven and hell is also lifted. So we go down and look at the stuff, but the Lord is there, and it makes it tolerable, because this is what I love about our program as opposed to just psychological counseling.
Right.
Because there's a spiritual component that like lifts the lid off, I guess not just the despair, but just glorious hope. And people have a visceral experience, like I just mentioned. That was a death, but they have those kind of experience of knowing, of feeling, of even sometimes hearing the love of their children in those moments. And I call them special gifts of grace. They're not in the retreat manual. It's what God does.
Yes.
In the context of the pages and all the exercises and all the activities that we do. He really reveals himself, and he's faithful in doing that. He always shows up. Like, sometimes our friends and even therapists don't show up, but you know, the Lord always shows up in Rachel's Vineyard.
He certainly does. I've seen it so many times. It's beautiful. Theresa, let me ask you this question. If somebody goes through Rachel's Vineyard, they find, I think of it as they find an impetus for healing. They go to a new level of healing, because we know that the healing work continues. Journey continues throughout life. There's more work to do after the retreat, but it's an impetus. It brings them to a new level. It gives them new insights. It just does a lot of things. Miracles happen on these weekends. But once a person has got to the point where they have undergone substantial healing, some of them do feel called to share their story. I mean, we see this in the Gospels. If people get healed, they want to go tell everybody about it, because look what God did to my life. And as we know, testimony is a big part of Christian history. The testimony of St. Augustine, the Confessions, St. Paul's conversion story. I mean, testimony is part of the very fabric of handing on the gospel from person to person and from age to age. Not everyone is called to do this. Not everyone should do this. But talk to us a little bit about the relationship between someone coming to healing after their abortion and then sharing the story publicly.
I think that many more people than we realize feel like they have to do something. And this is like any big loss. You look at mothers of drunk drivers that came out because they lost a child. Some of the drug overdoses, like a lot of causes that are very public in nature and bringing awareness. This is why I love Silent No More Awareness campaign. It's bringing awareness to the damage, and people feel that they're doing it as a way to honor their baby. That if their child's life can bring one person to have them change their mind about having an abortion, because these are things they never thought of, that it's worth it all. And not only do we have like Silent No More kind of public testimony, there's people that are giving testimony all over when these abortion laws are debated. They are right there at the courts. They stand up. Every year at the hospitals that perform abortions, there's a board meeting. And I know where we live, post-abortive women, and I'm usually invited to present data and research. You know, we go to instruct the board because they're making hospital policies. So when you have enough people out there kind of sharing the truth that used to be hidden. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years probably. And, it's been my life's work. And when I first started, people would come up to me after I gave a talk and they'd say, thank you for speaking for us, because I could never share. And then I remember saying that I'm not going to be able to do this forever. Like, you're gonna, you know, that was just someone who heard a talk. But the desire to get out and share. And we had a lot of women who wanted to go to high schools. They wanted to speak in a high school. And I remember when I used to speak in a high school, I would say, how many of you know someone had an abortion? The whole entire high school hand would go up. And then, how many of you have ever heard someone share what that was like. Not one person raised their hand.
Not one.
Telling. Everybody's having them, no one's talking about it. Why? There, at least back then, I think the dialogue today is more than I ever dreamed back then because it was so taboo.
Yes.
And but I still think there is a lot of taboo because Oprah Winfrey's never done a show yet on it.
Right.
She has had just about every cause and purpose and spirituality and this, that, other trauma, but never abortion. So there's sometimes an ideology that's pretty pervasive in the culture to not talk about that, but more and more we see, I'll call it, all the icky subjects coming forward because we got to deal with them. They're affecting people's lives. They're causing a lot of damage and trauma, and the world just needs healing. So, and the last thing that I'll say about this going public is also, I call it the woman at the well syndrome.
Yes.
Before you have post-abortion trauma, post-abortion syndrome, they used to call it, but when there's healing, we have stories of this one woman in Latin America that was literally, like biblical days, walking down her street, knocking on every door, true story, sharing what God had just done. They came from the light, and they're going to share the light.
Right.
And so you see not just that kind of public testimony with neighbors and friends, but calling others into healing. And this is absolutely a movement. I think it's an unstoppable movement because God wants to heal people. And who's he going to use? He's going to use the people who've been healed. And who's helping in the other programs? I wrote a program for soldiers called Duty to Heal, Finding Peace for Another, Living Scripture, psychological, spiritual, integrated, and grief to grace, retreats for healing after abuse. So we're dealing with all the sexual abuse healing in a week-long retreat. Guess who's running these programs? All the recovered post-abortive women who are experts in trauma, who have compassion like you've never seen, who are so present to the suffering because they know how to endure it in a way that somebody else would find too messy, too icky. They're courageous, they're brave, they're leading the way in my programs throughout the world, and I think we're in 80-some countries now, and many, many languages. So we got boots on the ground in every country, and it's an army to be reckoned with.
It is.
And that's the transformation. It's not just that you're better, but you are a source of strength, resilience, courage, and you can help other people. And even with the soldier's journey ends when he begins to heal other people.
Yes, exactly.
It takes you off your trauma because it's healed, but you understand it to be so sensitive and loving.
That ties into what John Paul II said, doesn't it? That those who have gone through this can become, and he mentions with the expert and friendly help of others, among the most eloquent defenders of everyone's right to life.
That was prophetic because it's happening now.
It's happening now. Thank you so much. Well, Father Frank Pavone here of Priests for Life with Dr. Theresa Burke. We will be back.